Author Peggy O'Mara once said, "The way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice." Indeed, how we speak to and treat our children is an essential part in determining how they grow up, see the world, and see themselves. When children are violated by what they see, hear, and experience, what's left behind is trauma, something that carries long into adulthood. The effects of childhood trauma are far-reaching, and sitting on the couch with me today to talk about the different kinds of childhood trauma will be Nadia Rawlins, a counselor at the National Counseling Center. She'll be advocating for those kids who can't speak for themselves, and will share tips on how we can help children and adults who have suffered from childhood trauma. So let's have a real conversation. So with me today is the lovely Nadia Rawlins. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. No complaints.
We are going to jump straight into the conversation today of childhood trauma.
Okay.
Children are God's most precious gifts, and too often we end up mistreating them. As a counselor, what has some of your personal experiences been with confronting childhood traumas in other children?
Okay.
Or even adults?
Okay, true. As you said, you know, children are often mistreated, and we really do have to protect our children. And unfortunately, you know, we see in my profession, you see a lot of children who would have experienced some sort of trauma, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, the loss of a parent, so many things, you know, that children have to experience and undergo. And even adults, you know, because adults do, all of us at some point would have experienced some sort of trauma. So it's a real issue that we see almost daily.
And yet so many adults will still tell you to this day that nothing from their childhood is affecting their reasoning today. They do what they do today simply because they want to. It has nothing to do with them having a certain type of childhood. Do you really believe that there's anyone whose life really was just devoid of having any type of childhood trauma at all?
You know, recently, like I attended a workshop last week, and we were reminded that we have to treat everyone as if they've experienced some sort of trauma, right? Because I think we think that trauma is only like sexual abuse, but trauma can be so many things, even surviving a hurricane. You know, a car accident, living with a parent who maybe is a substance user, so you experience that. So, I mean, trauma is all around us, and we each respond to it differently, and what we consider a trauma, like what I consider to be a trauma, may not be traumatic for you. So, it's, you know, it's based on your perspective and, you know, your experience.
Because some things can really leave us with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, indeed.
Like you said, even if it might be simple for you,
right?
A child hearing their parents having a fight,
that
could really traumatize a child.
Indeed.
I'll tell you a story. When I was younger, I never experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, anything like that. What I did have to deal with was a lot of verbal abuse.
Okay.
And often it wasn't just verbal abuse toward myself, but it was being exposed to the verbal abuse happening around me by surrounding people, adults particularly, especially women, and the way that they would argue with each other. You know, when I was younger, I would look at women fighting, and skirts were being tossed up in the air, and, you know, people were even using their body parts in the most, you know, the most degrading ways just to kind of prove a point or to win that argument per se. And we often look at these types of things as nothing. It's a part of how we were raised, or it's a part of our culture.
That can be trauma.
These things should not affect children in a certain way. And that I suffer from insomnia.
Okay.
And it started from the time I actually was a child. And I didn't realize until I was diagnosed with having night terrors. I had no idea what night terrors were.
Okay.
My mother had no idea what night terrors were. But I used to sometimes awaken from my sleep terrified.
Terrified, right.
Because of the things that I was internalizing. Like really bad arguments happening around me and things being said to me. What do you say to adults when it comes to what they expose their children to? Because often we expose children to arguments, but we don't expose them to the resolution, the conflict resolution.
Right.
We don't expose them to the positive sides of that. So what would you, as a counselor, say to parents?
You know, it's simply to be mindful, because often we feel that because they're not directly impacted, like I'm not arguing with you as a child, that they're not impacted, but they soak everything up. That's just the nature of children. So they learn how to be from watching mother, watching father. They learn how to handle emotions from watching their mother, how she, or their father, how they would handle situations. So we really have to be careful, you know, because, you know, they're like sponges, you know, they soak everything up. So even if they're not directly, like actually being verbally abused, just being in a home where they hear it, like it's constant arguments in their home, I mean, those are stuff that kind of affect them. Most definitely.
Do you believe in that the idea that we are or we become products of our environment? I see that.
Yes, I do. Yes, most definitely.
When it comes to being adults, carrying those types of traumas, do you believe then that we do have a responsibility to confront and deal with these childhood traumas?
Well, there's several factors. Now, some persons are more resilient than others. I would even go as far as to say some persons are born resilient, some persons just naturally resilient, right? So there are those persons that, you know, they recognize their circumstances and they want to do better, and they will seek out ways to do better, right? And some persons just either don't have the resiliency or there's no support. There's no one around you to say, you know, hey, let's work on this, or I think you should work on this. So a lot of it is just stuff that they just never work through, never had anybody to encourage them to work through, you know. So as you say, it really can go both ways, where, you know, you take your experience, whether it was a bad experience, and you said, okay, I don't want to be this way, you know, let me get the help that I need to get, or there are some that are just really resilient and can push through, you know, so it can go either way.
I really always try to do some kind of good wherever my feet are planted. I love philanthropy. I love, you know, just being a very altruistic person. And I came across a letter from an inmate who pretty much was expressing to his parents how much they shared in the responsibility of him being behind bars. It was one of the most touching, heartbreaking letters. But to hear this adult taking responsibility for his own actions and saying, my hands got me here, but it is it's the things that I was taught.
Wasn't
taught that really created the frame that became the picture that I had to live within for my life. Reading that letter, it got me thinking about the role, like you said, support, the role that the society plays, the role that adults play, really in who their children become. What have some of your childhood experiences been?
My childhood was uneventful, so I don't think I'm the best example to use, but I do recognize and I do understand that, you know, there are some persons who've had some real tough upbringings and real tough childhood. And, you know, as you mentioned, that letter got me thinking that children really do need structure, they need support from their parents. They like when their parents, and they appreciate when their parents act on their behalf and, you know, support them and do something. Let's say if they're being taken advantage of, they want their parents to do something, regardless of what we think. Because, you know, sometimes we say, oh, children are, you know, teenagers, they want you to stay out of their lives, when really they don't. They want that love. They want to feel that, you know, somebody cares for me, somebody is guiding me in the right direction.
And that's exactly what he was expressing, because when you look at him and why he was in prison, and you look at his life, most people would say that young man had a great upbringing. Like you said, very uneventful.
Uneventful, yeah.
He did not go through much of anything. But what he was describing was, you allowed me to get away with
Exactly
so
it.
much.
Yeah.
You never corrected me when you saw me bullying other children.
Right.
You never stopped me from doing certain things. You never denied me of anything. You
Right.
never made me have to work hard for anything. You gave me everything that I wanted. And I was baffled because I'm thinking to myself,
Sound like the ideal life, right?
it sounds like the ideal life, but
Yeah.
to this young man, that gave him this impetus to now become this person that
Right,
felt very
right.
entitled throughout
There was
his
no
life.
structure.
No structure,
Yeah.
thereby doing certain things that no are punishable.
Right.
Things that he would have known were punishable had he had some discipline and, like
Right.
you said, some structure of
structure, yeah.
discipline around him growing up. So it's obvious when we see childhood trauma and things happening directly. But what about the inactive aspects of it when it comes to parenting and that kind of hands-off
Right.
approach to things? We're going to touch on that and get a
Okay.
little bit deeper into this when we come back. A lot of the times, because things are so normalized, we don't recognize them as trauma. So when you say, for example, your childhood was uneventful, you could be telling someone the story of your life and they're sitting there going, do you realize that you've just touched on about 3 things that could be considered trauma?
That's true,
What do you
because we
think?
each have a different definition for a lot of things, right? So, and trauma is unique to the person. So, you know, they may not consider it trauma because, you know, there's no reference to, they have no reference, they have nothing to put it up against. So
Exactly.
they have no idea that, you know, maybe the way your parents spoke to you, you know, that wasn't the best. Or maybe the treatment you got wasn't the best, but to them.
But what about the community at large, the nation at large, when it comes to trauma? Because it's not an isolating situation
No, it's
when it
not.
happens to one person.
Right.
It's a ripple effect, and it affects a lot of people.
Well, I think the whole entire nation has experienced some sort of trauma, whether directly or vicarious trauma, because we've had a lot of incidents over the years, accidents, murders, those kind of things, and you know, we're a society where the first thing we grab is our phone, and we send around images of dead bodies. We send around gruesome accidents, and we don't recognize that that is vicarious trauma, not because you were directly involved in the trauma, but seeing it, hearing it.
Yeah.
You know, those are things that, you know, we've exposed to. COVID was trauma.
That was.
You know, a lot of different things that happen around the world that, you know, we hear about are traumatic experiences. But again, as I said, the degree to which I see it as being traumatic for me may be different for you.
Do you know where I find a lot of people come face to face with the fact that, with the realization that they did experience some type of trauma? It's in those personal relationships within their lives.
Yeah.
Those friendships with spouses, those friendships with friends.
Right.
Have you ever experienced a situation in your life where you felt like, my level of discernment here has something to do with maybe the way I was raised, or something that I didn't address back then, or something I wasn't taught back then, or was taught incorrectly about back then? Has there ever been a situation that made you go, I blame this on... What happened behind me?
Well, I think we all can relate from friendships, relationships, your upbringing, and you think about how you're handling a situation today. That came from some place. You know, it's because of, as you said, this person or that person, why I respond the way I did. And that's why I said with children too, they get the examples from, you know, what's going on at home. How do I respond, or as a particular situation, and how it made you feel, and you didn't even, you know, brush it off, you know, and then in your adult life is like, okay, this was not really the best situation, you know, but I just brushed it off and carried on with life.
And that's exactly what we do. And
Yes, indeed.
we perpetuate the trauma onto ourselves, within ourselves, by brushing it under the rug.
But the brushing under the rug is also a coping mechanism, because that's just how we're wired as human beings. You know, the brain is going to do what it needs to do to protect you.
Why are we wired to seek help?
Why? Are we not? Or why are we?
Why we don't seek help enough?
I think it's a cultural thing. I know. You know that thing, I don't want anybody in my business type of way. Yeah,
Yes.
So it's a cultural thing. So we don't readily go to seek help, you know. So we keep things in because you don't want anybody to be in your business. And then we have this spiritual element where God is going to take care of everything.
Yes.
But we also, you can have God and a therapist. But I think it's a cultural thing. We just don't want to
but we
let
definitely
people in.
need to start moving away from that.
Of course.
From
but
that
we've
mindset.
seen persons moving away because, I mean, at my office, we're very busy. We have persons coming. So that's a good sign. Although we know there are some more that needs to come, which means that, you know, as a community, as a nation, as a people, we have to really put more emphasis on mental health and, you know, helping persons.
What we don't realize is that we're all interconnected. We're all, you know, this newly found independent, everyone's woke, I don't need anyone, I can do everything by myself.
You can't do life by yourself.
None of us got here by us. Like, I'm sitting here today, not just because of anything that I did myself, but because of so many other people behind me, beside me, in front of me. So there's always going to be people whose life we affect or their lives affect us one way or another. Even the person at the grocery store that's bagging your stuff. And so I think that when we realize that the way we are as individuals can truly have a profound impact on someone else's life in a positive or a negative way, that's a responsibility. So my thing is, if we're all trying to be the best version of ourselves, why not find that help that can get us there?
That's true. I mean, but as I said, that's easier said than done because we still have that, you know, secretive nature about us, not wanting to seek help. And sometimes there's some persons who don't even know that they need help. You know, they just figure, this is how I am. This is how I've always been.
Or it's denial. It's
that's true. This is denial, or, you know, this is how I've always been, so I don't see anything wrong with it. Nothing happened to me. This is just me. You know, so you have to be aware. Self-awareness has a lot to do with that as well. So it's a whole, we could go on and on about that.
Something happened to me recently, and I want to hear your take on this. Something happened recently for me where I was very vocal about certain things from my past and talking about them, not for the purpose of exposure or throwing anyone under the bus, but simply for bringing awareness to certain things, because those things have been forgiven, because that was a part of my journey, forgiveness. But we first have to confront the things that have caused these resentments and these things that anchor us to our past. If we don't confront them, then we simply pack them up and we take them with us, and at some point they unload themselves onto our lives in terrible ways or onto somebody who truly loves us and is trying to help us. And what I got from that was not accountability from those responsible or involved, but it was more of, how dare you speak about it? So it's less of, I'm sorry or I feel bad that I did this, or I was a part of something that hurt you or hurt others in my past. I'm more upset that you had the audacity to say something about it. And I think that when it comes to our society, that is one of the biggest reasons why trauma still goes untreated in most people, because there's this fear of, it's like a father or a mother who abused the child their entire life, but because that child still loves their parents, the reputation their parents has, they're never going to say anything or speak up because, well, how dare you tell other people about this, even if this is going to bring awareness.
Sometimes it's the shame of recognizing that, hey, I caused trauma, or I caused something, you know, a response into somebody else's life. Shame of what would my image be you know, in the public. And you know, we have such an unforgiving society,
Yes.
right? That, I mean, they will talk about it for weeks and months and years. So that as well, you know, can affect that as well, because as I say, we're not forgiving. So for them to even accept any kind of responsibility or, you know, that kind of thing, and for somebody to speak up against is like, as you say, how dare you, that all like this deep, dark secret. And it comes back again to the secretive nature that we have as well.
So the empathy is lacking.
That's them personally,
Yeah.
you know, of their own personal shame. It has nothing to do with the victim.
Do you think that neglect to teach children things like empathy, forgiveness, sharing, kindness, do you think that those things can ultimately lead to trauma?
I mean, those are just some soft skills that I think all children should have, you know, and unfortunately, you know, if they're in homes with persons, parents, guardians, whoever they are, if they themselves were never taught and they themselves never experienced that love and forgiveness and empathy and all that stuff, then they do not have it to give to their child. And then it's just a continuous cycle. Just generations of persons who don't know how to handle emotions, persons who don't know how to even identify emotions.
Not being able to pour out what they don't have inside.
If you don't have it, you can't give it.
Perfectly said.
Yes.
When we come back, we're going to talk about some of these skills that people dealing with trauma can actually adopt, and also how do we even identify it. So Nadia, what are some of those tools and those life skills that you would teach some of your clients or some of your patients?
Okay, well, persons have an idea of how they think they should resolve trauma, right? And sometimes, most of the times, a lot of the work is with you, with self, you know? So it's about building that positive self-talk, you know, and try to move towards, well, healing, because healing comes, my definition and your definition might be different of healing, but how you work through your trauma, you know? So it's a lot of work. It's not an overnight thing, you know, and especially if you push this aside for so many years, you know, revisiting that again and, you know, working through that again can be difficult.
Well, before we even get there to the coping aspects of this, one first has to be able to recognize and acknowledge.
But unfortunately, some people don't know, and they would never know, because they just go through life. They just develop a set of coping skills that allows them to just go through life. And I think you would have mentioned earlier about when you get into relationships with friendships, and somebody else pointed out to you that, hey, maybe you need to work and look into this. And some people just never know. And as I say, it could be a coping mechanism because our body is wired in such a way that, you know, we're going to put up that defense, you know, to protect you at all costs. So you push that aside and you don't even recognize that, you know, this was trauma for me, you know, because as I said, we often think that trauma is just sexual abuse, but there's so many things can be traumatic. So many things, the loss of a job, you know, your financial troubles, as I said before, COVID, you know, all of the things that we witness and experience are traumatic incidents, but we don't see that. For you, if nobody abusing me, then it's not trauma.
With an illness or something like that.
Exactly,
or
health conditions.
It could be an extension of somebody that you care about and something happening to them, and because you have to assist in taking care of them, or, you know, it's a close friend or something like that. But you said something interesting a while ago, just regarding the way that we look at certain things when we're in relationships, for example, and we get called out. And yes, we don't want to encourage people to focus their attention on what other people think of them. You know, if you're going through your whole life and somebody's telling you, you know, you're physically unattractive, for example, that's something that you can brush off your shoulders, work on building your confidence and things like that. But when it comes down to character, if someone is saying to you, well, you know, the reason you've lost 3 friends in the past, you know, 6 months is because you've been proven to be dishonest, or you know, you talk, you don't you don't hold secrets very well. You're very loose-lipped, or just things like that. Or you're very cavalier about the things you say that hurt other people's feelings. At some point in time, we do have to hold the mirror up to ourselves and start going, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I am.
But sometimes you do need to be called out.
Yes.
Because sometimes that's when you kind of take a step back and be like, okay, let me kind of see if what they're saying to me is true, and, to see. But sometimes we don't need to be called out. But as you say, it's about personal accountability.
Exactly. Personal accountability. And one of the things I noticed in working with people who deal with this type of thing is that oftentimes they encourage persons who have gone through things to try and reconcile their feelings. Sometimes it could be through forgiveness, apologizing to these people directly and things like that. And oftentimes a lot of these people can be met with rejection. And there's already fear there in admitting that you were wrong and asking for forgiveness. And then you have to deal with the anxiety of dealing with rejection and having that actually be the case. I personally believe that we cannot force the readiness of other people
Of course not.
to be willing to accept their role in the way that they made us feel or the things that they did to us. I believe that I can forgive you and still just accept what you did to me, accept my role in it if there was any, forgive myself for any ill feelings harbored because of it, forgive you, and simply move on with my life. Where do you stand on that? Because that's just that's my principle on it. But
I do agree, because and that's the thing. Like when this is what you're seeking, like you want somebody to apologize to you. Like, what's the purpose? What would it do for you? That's what you have to ask yourself. Like, even if you want to confront an abuser, let's say, for example, what's the purpose of the confrontation? What do you want to hear? And if you don't get what you wanted to hear, then how does that leave you?
Yes.
Are you prepared to hear that they're not sorry?
Yeah.
Are you prepared to hear, like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't do anything to you, right? So sometimes the forgiveness, you can forgive and keep at a distance, as I said, personal work on yourself, so you're not harboring those ill feelings for the rest of your life. So you as I said, it's a personal journey that you go through. You do your own personal work. You decide, okay, I'm going to forgive this person. As you said, this would have happened to me. Yes, it was a difficult phase in my life. It really changed the course in my life. But I do recognize that this person will never take accountability. But I can't be stuck there.
Yes.
And that's a stuck point for many persons, because they're expecting the person to be like, oh, yes, I'm sorry. But
because we all want that closure.
You would want it,
We all want that closure.
We feel it's necessary.
We want our feelings to be validated and the things that we went through to be acknowledged. But I think that sometimes if the closure just doesn't come, the best closure sometimes is just taking your power back.
Amen. And protecting your peace. You won't always get that from persons. And this is not even just in traumatic situations, in friendships, in relationships, and, in those kind of situations, you may not get the closure that you expect, because then you're expecting them to say this or do this, and they don't give it to you, then what?
Because sometimes they're not even conscious of the fact that they've hurt you because of the things that they were taught.
Exactly. So they're unaware of how they would have affected your life. And maybe they are aware, but they just can't confess and fess up to, like, I really did, because then that puts them a little more vulnerable. So, it's a lot of factors, it's not black and white.
How do we protect our peace?
And that's hard. That's very, very hard to protect ourselves, because you just never know, right? So many things happen, and it's just life. It's just the nature of life, and the pervasive nature of trauma itself. So, I mean, anything can happen.
I'll ask you an interesting question, though, because I've heard a lot of people just throw their arms up and go, I just don't care anymore. Nothing bothers me because I don't care.
I never believe that.
I never believe that. We all care about something at some point or another.
But you say you don't care, that's the next coping mechanism. That's your way of coping.
Exactly. I was just going to ask that. Do you think that that's just creating this illusion of
that's putting
emotional
up your wall. That's your walls. Yeah, that's your walls. Yeah.
But really, they're the softest to penetrate, because all it takes is the right person.
Somebody to
at the
listen.
exactly, at the right time.
Yeah. But I mean, traumatic things happen daily, so it's kind of hard to avoid, because I said it's unique to us. So what's traumatic to me may not be traumatic for you. So a lot of things happen over the course of our
So
lives.
is it maybe fair to say that experiencing some level of trauma is a part of our human journey?
Yes, it is. Yes, that's what I said earlier. We have to treat everyone like they've experienced some sort of trauma.
So you think that there's some kind of benefit, some linear benefit to going through these types of things and surviving
difficult situations on a whole, because it helps us to become more resilient. We're able to handle things a little more better. I mean, what would life be if it's just
if we never had obstacles? Yes.
What would it be if it was just smooth sailing? So we have things that come in that send the boat in a different direction, a wave that carries the boat up, bring it back down. So I mean, it's not smooth sailing all the time, but this is just the nature of life. So we just have to hoping that we're able to build the resiliency and build the positive coping skills and stuff like that to get through. As I said, some persons are more resilient than others. Some persons may be born resilient, but we just have to try to build resiliency, and that comes about from the support that you have around you, and you seeking the help that you need, and just having people in your corner.
So we're going to touch on some of that support,
okay,
and what we could all be doing better at when we come back. So it's clear to see that when children experience or witness negative experiences in childhood, that this has a long-term effect on them, psychologically as well. So with regard to children, and I'm going back there because I definitely do believe that these things start in our childhoods, and if we can start addressing the problem there, then we can nip a lot of things in the bud for the society that we live in today. Because to have a better society, it has to start with the children, because they are the future. They are going to be the members of tomorrow. So with that said, what do you think society on a whole has been falling short when it comes to the way that they approach these things with children, specifically the way they speak to children and what they expose them to?
Right. Okay. As you know, as a society, and you probably heard it growing up, children should be seen, not heard. So children sometimes don't have a voice. And not sometimes, most of the times don't have a voice, because for them to have a voice, it's seen as being rude and disrespectful, right? So a lot of the times they don't express how they're feeling, they don't express their emotions, because when they do, it's shut down. So for example, a child may come to you and say they're feeling stressed. Typical response from a parent or whoever is around will be, stressed for what? You don't have any bills to pay. You don't have any worries, but children do experience stress. Stress at school, stress in friendships, a lot of different things that they experience. So we tend to think that children don't feel a lot of things and are exposed to a lot of things. So we shoot them down so they don't express these emotions. So then and there's nobody to listen. So of course, again, it's bottled up. But we really have to listen to our children more. Give them the opportunity to speak. And I guess that goes in changing the way we parent, but that's a whole different conversation. But in how you allow your children to express themselves. They can express themselves. It doesn't have to be rude or disrespectful. But your child should be able to say, I feel this way. This happened to me in school today and it made me feel this way. And have it heard and acknowledged. And that's important for our children.
So identifying within the child that those are feelings.
Feelings, and they have a right to feel.
Using that particular verbiage intentionally. This is how you feel. Tell me how you're feeling today.
Tell me how you're feeling today. Something simple as, how was your day? You had a test today. How did that make you feel? Or, just asking them to be able to express their emotions, because children tend to have a small vocabulary of emotions, and that's because we don't teach them you know, and we don't allow them to express themselves. So you get the one line, how are you? Fine. How are you? Good. How are you? I'm okay. But you want them to dig a little deeper. So, you know, really tell you how they're feeling about a particular situation. So we have to encourage it. We have to encourage them to talk, you know, and not just shoot them down because you feel that children shouldn't feel this way.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
I once met a lady, and she beautiful concept of parenting. And she said to me, I learn with my child. I don't necessarily wait for my child to come home and introduce something that in her mind, mommy should have already known.
Okay.
So she goes, I learn with her. So when my daughter has 10 words that she got from school that she's supposed to learn, I make it this thing between the two of us where, okay, mommy's gonna learn 5 words this week. And then mommy's gonna integrate her 5 words into our conversations and vocabulary.
Beautiful.
Because it's a learning process for the both of them. But like you said, it's exposing this child to so much more. And she took that approach into every aspect of the relationship, from with her daughter, from cooking and things like that. What would you like to eat today? Why? Here are the nutritional, you know, values to what it is that you really, are you sure you want to eat this? And then they do it together. You're teaching them.
You're teaching
as
them,
you go along.
and incorporating them in the process.
Because the world is going to be the biggest educational landscape.
And if you don't do
when
it,
it
they
comes
will
to
learn
children.
it. So they'll learn it someplace else, and it may not be the message that you want them to learn.
Exactly. So you want to create that balance at home. So with that in mind, there's this, it's taking over. Social media, these gadgets, these devices, these, here you go, and mommy or daddy goes over here.
Right.
What role do you think social media has to play in where things are going right now with the traumas that children that children have to suffer, and them holding that in, and possibly even finding negative outlets out there because, like you said, they have no one to talk to.
Right. No, social media we know has its good and it has its bad, and unfortunately, I don't think there's a way we can get around it because it's just in our faces, right? We have the TikTok, Instagram, whatever else they have, Facebook, all those other stuff, right? So our children get a lot of messages and a lot of information from there, and sometimes it's false, right? Sometimes it's false. And then there's nobody to correct it, right? Because nobody's paying attention to what they're doing and what they're watching and what they're listening to, so they soak that up. You know, children even diagnose themselves from watching TikTok videos or watching videos on Instagram, because they think, oh, I can relate to this, or maybe I have this disorder, right? And then nobody's paying attention to what they're watching or what they're listening to, so they soak that up, and that becomes their reality. But I mean, social media is I don't even know the best way to describe. I don't even know the best way to describe it. But I mean, it's something. Let's just
it's like a landfill.
It's something.
I mean, a landmine. Sorry.
It's something, you know. And I mean,
if you're careful, you'll get the good. You'll get the good
stuff.
But then
but it's hard to be careful because these things just infiltrate. You could be watching an innocent video. And something comes up, so that we really have to be careful.
That's why I said it's like a landmine, because at any given time, one misstep, and
that's it.
It could just all go wrong.
And what's out there is like there's no filter for anything and everything is there. So, you know, how do you protect your children from this? And it's about, you know, being more mindful, paying attention. You cannot give them the tablet or the phone, and that becomes babysitter, that becomes mom, that becomes dad. Because they get everything from there. They learn everything from there. And as I said, some of the information is just wrong.
Do you think that the overexposure of children at a young age can be categorized as childhood trauma, or could potentially lead
potentially,
to childhood trauma?
Potentially indeed, because they're exposed to so much and they want to experiment from what they see and that kind of thing. So it can potentially head down a real dangerous path.
But what about the exposure that's being done by parents? on,
terms of
on their children. There are a lot
Okay.
of parents now who are actually the perpetrators of
Of course.
exposing and
Yes.
exploiting, in
Yes.
some cases,
Yes.
their own children.
Indeed. Indeed. That's
Could
another
that
side of
possibly
it.
be another side of it?
Yeah, that is another side of it, because as I said, I mean, even for children that are in homes, as we talked about before, that they experience, that they see or they witness, you know, they some sort of abusive behavior. So it's about being careful what you expose your children to, you know, not just what you give them, but you yourself, what you're teaching them, what is the message that you're giving them, what are you showing them, you know, that is very important as well.
And not leaving it up to the rest of the world.
And unfortunately,
do
we leave it up to the
parenting for
social
you.
media, the TikTok, to handle everything. And as I said, sometimes the messages are wrong, and you know, there's nobody to correct it. So that becomes the reality, what they think it's real, what real life is supposed to be.
Do you think we share too much when it comes to our children? Instead of preserving that innocence, we tend to overshare. I mean, you have children at very young ages doing photo shoots and having their photographs.
No, you can do a photo shoot.
Social media.
But it's the nature of the photo shoot, because some of them are just too adult.
Yeah.
You know, because you could do a nice innocent photo shoot as a child. But I always believe in protecting children. And some persons may not agree with me, but the exposure, as you say, putting your children out there on social media, I mean, you just have to be so careful, because there's so many predators, so many persons lurking around the corner, you know. So for me, it's just about protecting your child. Let them get to the age where they decide that this is what I want to do. I'm the parent, I'm not going to expose you to that.
Because the fact of the matter is, in a perfect world, no one is looking at an underage child and sexualizing them.
In a perfect world.
But we do not live in a perfect world.
Exactly. So we
instead
have
of
to
going,
be very careful.
it's not, don't focus on what I'm doing with my child, focus on people taking it a certain way.
Right.
Instead of that being the mindset, just accept that this is the world that we live in. And there are a lot of things that need to change, but until those changes happen, you have a responsibility to protect
that's it right there.
your child.
A responsibility to protect your child. We do.
By any means necessary.
Parents, community, everybody, we all have a part to play, you know, in how we protect our children, the messages they get, you know, just everything. We just have to protect our children the best way we can.
If you could leave us with one thing as a society on a whole,
that's a tough one.
Regarding childhood, childhood trauma.
I would
what
just
would
say,
that be?
I would just say we all have a part to play. You know, I don't think any entity or any part of society is exempted. I think we all have a part to play. You know, even in terms of support. You know, the things that we expose children to, the care that we give our children, you know, when something bad happens, how we treat the situation, how we treat the child, you know. So I would just say we all have a part to play. You know, we all have a role to play, and we cannot take a hands-off approach. You know, as we always say, it takes a village. It really does take a village. It really does. It takes a village. So, you know, I just want to say that, you know, we all do have a part to play in, you know, the future of our children.
Perfectly said. So doing more, paying attention,
being more mindful, being more aware.
And just in general, being a more compassionate society, especially when it comes to children. I hate seeing children struggling to express themselves, not because they can't express themselves, but for fear of how that self-expression is going to be received and ridiculed. Thank you so much for coming today, Nadia.
Thanks for having me.
It has been a pleasure, my old washi boots.
Thanks for having me.
Trauma is personal. It does not disappear if it is not validated. When it is ignored or invalidated, the silent screams continue internally, heard only by the one held captive. When someone enters the pain and hears the screams, healing can begin. This passage from Daniel Burnock's Emerging with Wings highlights the nature of trauma inflicted on children. But there is hope. With the right support, we can heal from these wounds, but we have to give space for it in society. So feel free to join in on the topic and many more by logging on to our socials here and here. Remember that when you know better, you do better. See you next time.
Of course. it.